Hey, how's it going? Yuri back with you. Hope you had a great weekend and hope you've been enjoying the videos. Again, I've had a lot of fun putting these abs specific videos together for you, celebrating the April of abs, and the comments on the blog have been awesome. So I really appreciate all the feedback and all your questions and all the encouragement. It's been great, and it's good to know that I'm giving you what you're looking for, and hopefully as we go through the next week or so, I'm going to give you some more great stuff. And starting with today, we are going to look at a very commonly misunderstood area of fat loss. And again, when I'm talking about fat loss, I'm referring to belly fat loss as well, because it's all the same, as we've mentioned, right? You have to lose overall fat before you can lose belly fat, as you now know. So here's the deal. You're going to see a couple graphs behind me on the board here. Don't worry, I'm going to explain them, but let me preface today's video with I want to bust a common myth. Okay, you've probably heard this 1,000 different times in 1,000 different ways on different media sources, saying that in order to keep your metabolism elevated, you have to eat 5 to 6 meals a day. And therefore, the notion, the deduction, if we're to kind of go into logical reasoning from this, is that the more you eat, the higher your metabolism will be. That's kind of the reasoning with that kind of argument. So it doesn't make a lot of sense. And I don't know about you, but I personally do not eat 5 to 6 times a day. I don't even know if I ever have in my whole life. So if that's something you've struggled with, I want you to know that you don't have to eat that way if you want to stay lean, if you want to burn belly fat, if you want to just be healthy. Because the other thing is, first of all, not only is it time consuming to eat 5 to 6 meals a day, but it's almost physically impossible for many of us, especially if we're a lighter frame, to eat that amount of food. Again, I'm an ectomorph, I have a slighter frame, I can't eat that amount of food. I might have 2 to 3 meals a day. I have some friends that are much bigger, 200 plus pounds. They need a lot more food throughout the day to fuel their body. But again, does that mean they have to be eating 5 or 6 times a day? Or does it make a difference if they just 2 or 3 times a day? And what constitutes a meal? A lot of studies consider an apple a meal. If you have coffee and you add sugar or milk to your coffee, well, that, if you look at the calories in that coffee, that could be considered a meal. So it's very confusing, and I want you to understand that you don't have to believe all that nonsense, because it's not true. So I'm going to show you the truth today about how your diet has very little impact on your metabolism. And I mentioned this last week briefly in our FAQ video, where I mentioned that diet has very little impact on metabolism, and your metabolism is really what is most important if you want to burn calories, because your metabolism accounts for 70%. Your resting metabolic rate accounts for 70% of the total calories you burn on a daily basis. 10% is going to come from the thermic effect of food, and about 20% is going to come from other things like exercise and other activity and stuff like that. But food has a very small impact. So I want to show you some of these graphs here. I've looked at the research, and I've obviously I'm trying to make this as simple as possible for you to understand. So I'm not going to quote specific studies here, but I'm going to take the general themes from most of the research with respect to this. So the first one I want to look at here, and I want you to look at, is this bottom graph. I'm going to try to find my pen here. My good old markers, blue and orange, or blue and red. Hopefully you can see it okay. So what we have here, we have this bottom graph. We're just going to focus here for a second. What we have here is we have resting metabolic rate on the y-axis, and lean mass, your lean body mass. So this is your bone, muscle, everything other than fat on the x-axis. So what this one study looked at was, they looked at, is there a difference on resting metabolic rates if you were on a low-calorie diet, and exercise, or if you were on a high-calorie diet, and I didn't actually include that in there. So there's 3 different groups: low-calorie diet and exercise, or high-calorie. And what the research found was that there was absolutely no difference between the groups. The most statistically significant variable as to how high your metabolism, resting metabolic rate was, is your lean mass. So it didn't matter if you are eating 500 calories a day or 5,000, or if you're exercising with while eating, following a low-calorie diet. The only thing that would increase your resting metabolic rates is your lean mass. which means in order to have a higher metabolic rate, which is essentially the number of calories your body burns at rest throughout the day, you need to have more muscle. That's why I keep telling you guys that strength training is so important and is the most important thing in the long term for you to burn fat, because resting metabolic rate accounts for 70% of the calories you burn every single day. So you need to do things not by diets and all that ridiculous stuff, but through building lean mass, because we know that the more lean mass you have, the greater your metabolism. And that's simply because muscle is more metabolically active than fat. Makes sense, okay? So that's the first thing. I hope that makes sense to you. The second thing I want to bring up is the notion that if we do not eat enough food, for instance, if we skip a meal, or God forbid, we might have to fast for a day, we're going to totally destroy our metabolism. Well, first of all, as I just showed you in this study, a very, very low calorie diet has no impact on metabolic rate. And there's a lot of other studies that have shown that if you fast, so doing a fast to essentially just drinking water for up to 3 days, for up to 72 hours, has no impact on resting metabolic rate. Okay? Now, I'm a huge believer and proponents and practitioner, if you want to call it, of intermittent fasting. And essentially what that is throughout the week you eat your typical meals, and then one day you decide, okay, you know what, today I'm not going to have any food. And why that works so well is because, and we've been scared to believe that, if we miss a meal or if we miss a day of meals, we're just going to store fat and like all hell's going to break loose, the world's going to come to an end, and we're just going to turn into these big fat blobs. And we've been led to believe this because the arguments are that, when our ancestors were scavenging the wild and they're hunting and gathering, sometimes they wouldn't have any food. So therefore, in those periods of starvation, the body would then obviously look to hold on to fat. Right? So that's the argument that a lot of people use. And there obviously is some degree of truth to that, especially with prolonged fasting. I'm talking about several weeks. But if we're talking about fasting for a couple days at the most, and I don't really you don't have to fast for 72 hours. It's, that's a little bit too much, I think. But if you took 1 day a week and said, you know what, I'm not going to have anything to eat for 18 to 24 hours, and I'm just going to drink water, there's a couple things that are going to happen. I'm going to talk about the physiological benefits in a second. But one of the most powerful things is that you're going to get a better association with food. You're going to be able to disconnect from always thinking about, oh my God, what am I going to have for dinner? What am I going to have for lunch? We're always thinking about food. And that, I don't know, I do. Personally, I'm always thinking about when's my next meal, what is it going to be, how am I going to prepare it, time, all this kind of stuff. And it's really fatiguing. It tires your mind out. And when you're able to do a fast for a day, it's really liberating because you don't have to think about that kind of stuff, because you're not going to have anything to eat until whatever time you've decided. So it's very liberating, but it's also really cool because you can also tap into your body's true need for food. Like, are you really hungry, or are you just conditioned to eat at specific times or during certain situations? So from that perspective, from a kind of a breaking the habit perspective and learning about yourself and your hunger patterns, it's very powerful. So with that said, let's talk about fasting for a second. So fasting, there's two states in the body. There's a fed state and the fasted state. When you eat food, you're considered to be in the fed state for several hours as your body is digesting the food. In the fasted state, we have no food. Okay, the body is essentially just working on what it has, and it is going through a bunch of processes. So there's one study, I've kind of, this graph up here is I've merged one study and a couple other important things into one. So in this one study, they looked at fasting for up to 36 hours. And what they found here was that in the first 24 hours, there was a 70% decrease in blood insulin levels. That is amazingly powerful. I'm going to tell you why in a second. After the 24 hours, obviously there's diminishing returns, right? So the more you fast, the less there's going to be less of a benefit from insulin from that perspective. But in the first 24 hours, there's a 70% decrease in insulin levels. Now, why is that important? Well, as we looked at a couple of videos ago, insulin is a storage hormone. It's an anabolic hormone. It stores things, and it stores sugar in fat cells. It stores fat in fat cells. So with fasting, if you can decrease insulin, which just happens to happen, then you have less things being stored as fat. Does that make sense? It's very powerful, and it's one of the reasons why doing a short-term fast is very powerful for helping you burn fat, because you're simply not storing stuff as fat anymore. See, the other thing is when we're in a fasted state, our body is looking to move to a different fuel source, which is essentially using more fat as a fuel, as we talked about in this kind of doing exercise before breakfast video that we looked at last week. In this fasted state, the body, your body, is looking to conserve blood sugar, looking to conserve muscle glycogen, so it's going to turn to fat and break that down, because there's a lot of fat in the body, and it's kind of there as a reserve for fuel, and the body's going to use that as its kind of main fuel source during the fasted state. There's a couple of ways this happens. I'm going to show you. So here's the thing. So independent of this study, what happens is when insulin goes down, there's another hormone that the pancreas produces and secretes called glucagon. You may have heard of it, you may have not. Now what happens is glucagon actually helps to maintain adequate blood sugar levels in the opposite fashion that insulin does. So insulin takes sugar out of the blood, glucagon will break down fat or blood sugar stores and increase blood sugar or sugar in the blood. So during the fasted state, when insulin levels are lower, which means that we're not storing stuff anymore, glucagon is then increased, because now the pancreas says, okay, you know what, we actually have to bring some sugar into the blood. So let's secrete glucagon, which will go to the fat cells, which will go to the muscle cells, and say, hey, you know what, I need some sugar to come into the blood. So in this state, in the fasted state, we have more glucagon, which is good because now we're breaking down fat. Another thing that happens is that the adrenal glands will kick out cortisol and epinephrine, and those two hormones will go to your fat cells and they'll activate hormone-sensitive lipase, which is a specific enzyme in the fat cells to break down fat and to be metabolized for fuel. So you have a number of different breaking down hormones, if you want to call them, like catabolic hormones, that are released during the fasted state, and it's all about regulating your body's blood sugar level. Insulin is the main anabolic buildup hormone. It's decreasing during the fasted state. The other hormones which break things down, epinephrine, cortisol, and glucagon, all increase to break down fat stores, break down, to a lesser degree, stored carbohydrate stores to maintain blood sugar levels. The other thing the really cool thing that happens now, so a lot of people have this concern as well that if they're going to be fasting, they're going to lose muscle mass because, oh my God, if I'm in a fasted state, my body's going to go into my protein stores and break down my muscle and use that as fuel, and that will happen with extended periods of fasting. So I'm talking about several weeks where there's severe deprivation of food and nutrients. That will happen. In the short term, when we're looking at, again, 18 to 24 hours, growth hormone actually increases. And this is really interesting because it's the only anabolic hormone that increases during the fasted states. Insulin is also an anabolic hormone, which means that it stores stuff. It decreases, as we've seen here, in the fasted state. Growth hormone increases, and the reason it increases is to preserve muscle. Isn't that cool? And there was a study that actually, I think it was done in mice, where they somehow just kind of got rid of growth hormone, so they prevented it from being released. And what they found in that study was there was a 50% loss in muscle mass during, I think it was a 24, 36-hour fast. So that's pretty significant, which tells us that growth hormone is secreted during the fasted state to help us maintain our lean muscle. And that's very important because when it does that, we are able to maintain our lean muscle mass, and therefore we're able to maintain our higher resting metabolic rate. So even during the fasted state, we are not depressing our metabolic rate, we're not storing fat, we're essentially allowing our body to tap into more of the fat as a fuel source and save some more of our muscle glycogen. If you think about all the religions in the world, all incorporate some degree of fasting in their, in their practice. There's, aside from the fat burning benefits, there's a huge amount of health benefits. Insulin, we know that high insulin levels over time will lead to hyperinsulinemia, which leads to increased fat storage, which also increases the likelihood of developing insulin resistance, which is essentially type 2 diabetes. So we don't want high levels of insulin, right? So by fasting for only 24 hours, now you're just dramatically reducing your insulin levels, which is a huge benefit. You're also improving your growth hormone levels, which is very important from a muscle building standpoint. And so here's what I want to kind of get across here is that if you fast, if you don't eat anything all day, you'll be okay. Okay? That's what I want you to understand is you will be fine. You will not break down muscle. You will not lose muscle. If anything, the only thing you're going to lose is a little bit of fat, because that fat will be broken down and used as a predominant fuel source during the fasted state. Okay, so how do you do this? What's the best way to go about adding a fast into your week? And this is something that I do without even really considering that I'm doing it a lot of times. And it's very natural too, because some days, let's say you're on the weekend, the tendency is that just across, I mean, as human beings, this is the social trend, is that Friday, Saturday, and sometimes Sunday, our food intake increases dramatically. You know, for whatever reason, we think of the weekend as just kind of letting go. We kind of, and I do this too, believe me. I mean, the weekends for me are a little bit not as healthy as they should be all the time. So I'm not superhuman. I have my weaknesses, specifically crepes, chocolate crepes. We'll keep that for another day though. Nonetheless. So during the weekend, we had this kind of increased fuel coming in from food, and then on Monday, we're like, okay, we're all gung-ho, and it's a new week, it's a new beginning, we're gonna decrease our food intake. And sometimes, for me, after I've had a lot of food on the weekend, I actually don't eat anything on Monday until later in the day. So let's say I have dinner at 7 o'clock on a Sunday night, and I'm digesting until about 9, go to bed around 9:30, 10. So let's say my fast will start at 10 o'clock p.m. I wake up the next morning, let's say I'm doing my thing, by 10 a.m. I'm already at 12 hours. Now, if I go to, let's say, I can't even do my math here. So let's say we just wanted to do an 18-hour fast, which is really where the benefits start to kick in at about the 18-hour mark. 10 p.m. from the previous night, all the way to, let's say 6 p.m. of the Monday would be 20 hours, if I'm not mistaken. I hope my math is right there. If it's not, I apologize. So that's a 20-hour fast, and that's a really simple way to do it, because half of that fast has been taking place during my sleep. Whereas if I woke up in the morning, as a different comparison, as if I woke up in the morning and I said, okay, at 7 a.m. I'm going to start my fast. So now I have to go all the way through the day, which is the toughest part, is I have to start the fast all the way through the day, get to night, get to the time where you just want to eat and kind of kick back, and you're still fasting, and then the end of the fast would take place while you're sleeping. So that's a little bit trickier to do. So what I'd recommend is have your meal at night. Obviously the earlier the better. You don't want to go to bed on a full stomach. Whatever time you finish digesting, and let's just call it whatever time you go to bed, that would be the start of your fast. And then just add 18 to 24 hours after that time to break your fast the following day. And I guarantee this is something that will make a huge difference on so many levels of your health, your body's ability to burn fat, and that psychological connection to food. It's really, really cool not to have to think about food, understanding why you're craving certain foods at certain times of the day. It's a very, very powerful exercise to go through. So that's what I'm going to suggest for you today. Think about this. This is actually something you can start doing, like commit to doing it today, just as a test, see how it goes. You might go through a bit of a woozy period, a little bit of a headache, caffeine withdrawal, maybe, depends on your diet. But I guarantee if this is something you can do on a weekly basis, it'll make a huge difference in your body's ability to burn fat and obviously see the definition that you want to see with those nice sexy abs and muscle tone and everything else, as well as tremendous health benefits. So I'm going to give you some really, some more detailed information on this next week. I'm preparing a video right now that's going to talk specifically about a really cool protocol that I use and I've used in a couple of my programs that are it's very powerful, very simple to follow as well, that I'll share with you briefly next week, probably on Wednesday. So stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, I've got a ton other videos coming for you. Tomorrow, I'm going to be sending you a video on a 4-exercise ab workout, which is really, really cool. Very simple stuff. I'm shooting it from my basement, so it's really simple to follow in like 10 minutes. It's awesome. So until then, thanks for watching. Hopefully this cleared some stuff up for you. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video. And actually, one more thing that I need to mention is that I had an epiphany the other day, and I've committed to And I posted this on Facebook the other day. I've committed to helping at least a minimum of 500 people, hopefully that's you included, transform their abs and body by July 1st of this year, 2012. So I want you to be one of the 500 people. If you want in, just let me know in the blog section below. Just say, yes, count me in. I want to transform my body by the summer. And I'll tell you exactly what this entails as we get into over the next week or so. But again, I want you to know that this is part of the reason for the April of Abs is like I'm committed to helping you achieve the body you want for summer and beyond, right? It's not just like bathing suit season and then let's just go back to eating potato chips, right? It's about lifelong change. And I've committed, I woke up the other morning and I said, you know what? I'm gonna set a goal, because sometimes there's nothing more inspiring, more powerful than setting a really cool, ambitious goal and creating a movement, if you will. So 500 people, I want you to be one of them. Let me know on the blog below if you're in, and if you are, that's great. I'll keep you up to date as to what we're doing and how it's going to all unfold. And until then, watch for tomorrow's video, and have a great day.